Okay, so the chapter I chose to pick out of All President's Men was chapter 12. For me, this was a super memorable chapter. I think this is probably the first time in the book where Deep Throat gave Woodward unprovoked thought on some information about Colson and Mitchell. He definitively told them that they were definitely behind the Watergate scandal and that there's multiple reasons as to why they were. There's another instance in the chapter where Woodward and Bernstein are both talking to a senator out of North Carolina, Senator Ervin, and they're both telling him that, the senator is telling him that they're looking at opening an investigation against the Republicans in Watergate, and they're asking for Woodward and Bernstein's help. And while during this whole time, I think what makes this chapter most memorable for me is that they talk about an instance where Woodward and Bernstein get into this knockdown, drag-out fight over to publish this story of Mitchell and Colson. Because Woodward asked Woodward asked Deep Throat, hey, do I have enough to publish this story? And Deep Throat didn't say exactly, but, you could kind of tell that Deep Throat was like, well, I can't really tell you. I don't think you have enough. And apparently Woodward and Bernstein argued about it for several days. I mean, there was shouting matches in the vending machine room, a lot of that sort of stuff. But there was one line that stuck out to me, and he said, there's one rule, and that if either of the writers disagree on the story being posted or published, you don't publish the story. And that's huge, I think, in this chapter. That is a huge lesson for all journalists. So anyway, going back to the Senator Ervin story, Ervin was asking Woodward for information, and Woodward was contemplating on giving it to him, but he realized that, no, I can't give my sources up like that and any information that I have up, because that could lead out. Even though they say they won't leak any information of that out in the investigation, it still could. Now, this chapter really does speak to sources and how to keep them safe. Again, Woodward has done a very good job at this point of keeping Deep Throat a very secret source. His editors, his publishers have wanted to know who Deep Throat was, trying to get him on the record, because, they were getting a lot of anonymous quotes in these stories. But, Woodward couldn't burn his source like that. It was the same when it came to the senator, right? You have information from all these sources, but you can't just give it away to someone who's going to do an investigation and put them in total trust of your work and all of your evidence. You can't do that, right? You're putting yourself at risk, you're putting your stories at risk, and you're putting your sources at risk, which is a huge no-no in journalism. This chapter really kind of summarizes the whole book. I mean, if I had to tell someone who's reading this book next year about, what the importance is of reading this book and how it really shapes the way a journalist thinks, I would tell them to read this chapter. I think it's very important that these students realize that they were really under the gun here, and they could have done a lot of things to make them, not seem trustworthy journalists, which they could have gotten away with, but they really did not cut any corners as to gaining the information, trying to figure out what sources they can write, what sources they can't write, the diligence of their reporting and getting information. I really think that this is the poster chapter and poster book of how to do journalism. I mean, the amount of hours that they spent trying to put together this case and really trying to bring down the conspirators of Watergate was really crazy. I mean, I had always known the story of Watergate and how these reporters brought him down, but it's amazing that it took this long and this much effort to get them down. I mean, again, you're talking about a White House administration, but the amount of hours that Woodward and Bernstein putting in, calling all these sources, trying to get them on the record. And if they don't get on the record, what information can they get out of them? I mean, it just had to be like, I can't even imagine calling a source and like, well, you can't post me on the record, can't be on the record, can't say my name, you can't quote me directly, can't do this, can't do that. I mean, they were probably just so annoyed at that point with all of these sources, but it really does speak to their dedication to the story of sticking to their word and not lying to any of their sources about burning them in the newspaper. I mean, that's what I would say to Journalism 101 students is Journalism 301 students is how hard they work to keep this story legitimate.